Hello, hola, and ni hao. Welcome back to another episode of The Pilot Principle. This is the podcast where we take a look at just the first episode of a series, the pilot, and then use it to decide if we should watch the entire series, or at least the second episode. If you are new here, I suggest you hit that follow button to know when the new episode comes out, because I more often than not just forget to promote this podcast on social media, and I'm always surprised when I have significantly lower views that week. So yes, give this podcast a follow if you are a regular listener or after you've listened to this episode and you just like what you heard. Right, on this episode of The Pilot Principle, we shall be peeling back the pilot episode of ITV1's new action thriller series, Red Eye. And for those who don't know what a red eye is, so it is, according to the Oxford Dictionary, a flight on which a passenger cannot expect to get much sleep on account of the time, departure, or arrival. It's a very North American term. I hear it whenever I watch American things. I'm going to catch the red eye to New York. I think that was an okay accent, right? Anyway, with the only American accent that I'm going to do in this episode out of the way, let's take a look at what the series synopsis tells us. Jing, Lusi and Richard Armitage star in a race against time at 30,000 feet. When a man is flown back to China to answer for his crimes, he finds himself in a deadly conspiracy. Intriguing. But before we can possibly understand what all of that means, especially in context to the pilot itself, let's take a look at the credits. And this is the point where I basically get to act like a newsreader as I let you know a few bits of information from some of the cast and crew that have helped make the pilot episode what it is. Let's start with the pilot title, and sadly we have lost our streak because there is no pilot title. Boo. Love a pilot title. Just come up with something cool and interesting. I would call this episode A Long Way Back. Oh, yeah, there you go. You're welcome. Right, we've got a pilot synopsis that says a British man gets caught up in an incident in Beijing, and upon his return, he's accused of foul play. Now he must go back to China to face his crimes. We have a pilot length of 45 minutes and a series length of 6 episodes. The pilot episode, episode 1, was written by Peter A. Dowling, who is also the series creator, and he has written the movies Flight Plan, Reasonable Doubt, and Black and Blue, plus a couple of episodes of the animated series Transformers Rescue Bots Academy. No shade, get that bank. Moving on to the director, the pilot episode was directed by Kieran Hawkes, and he has directed episodes of Cuffs, Ripper Street, and various books in the Power franchise, as well as Intergalactic. The pilot stars Jing Lusi, who plays Hannah Lee, and Lucy has starred in the movie Argyle, the movie Heart of Stone, the series Gangs of London, the movie Crazy Rich Asians, and the soap series Holby City. Next, we have Richard Armitage, who plays Dr. Matthew Nolan, and Armitage at this point is basically just a friend of the pod because he just comes up so often. But for those who don't know, he has starred in Fool Me Once, which is the Harlan Coben Netflix series, and he's pretty much done all the other Harlan Coben ex-Netflix series except for Safe. He's also starred in Ocean's 8, The Hobbit trilogy, and BBC's Robin Hood, which is where I know him from way back in the didgeridoo-ding-dong day. And he's also done a bunch of voice acting roles, which kind of makes sense. I mean, that voice can sing me to sleep, read me a bedtime story any day of the week. The pilot also stars Dan Lee, Gemma Moore, and Leslie Sharp, and you can watch Red Eye on ITV1 Sundays at 9 p.m. or on ITVX, where all episodes are currently available. Now, in terms of what made me want to watch the series, or at least the pilot episode, this is another one where the ads just got me. I couldn't walk through central London for about the last 2 weeks without seeing a digital poster for Red Eye. I knew Richard Armitage was going to be in it, and you know what? I'm kind of loving his whole like weird mystery thriller drama thing that he just is always doing. So he was basically the next reason why I thought I might have to give this a watch. And finally, if there's one thing to know about me, I love a mystery. I love a whodunit. And this potentially all taking place on a plane? Sign me up. Sign me up. Right, enough anticipation. Let's get into the pilot itself, starting with the first 10 minutes. Why the first 10 minutes, you wonder? Well, because it is the opening piece in the game of TV pilot chess. TV was, or I guess is, still formatted into acts to sort of fit around the advert. So those first 10 minutes need to feel rounded, but also hook you in so you don't change the channel during the breaks. And I think that trick still works even without breaks on things like streaming services, because I think we've just become conditioned to expect the hero to begin or accept their mission by the end of Act 1, aka the first 10 minutes. And the first 10 minutes of episode 1 of Red Eye goes like this. We start in Beijing and we watch as Dr. Matthew Nolan stumbles out of a building and into a car, escaping the men who are chasing him. He's been injured and he subsequently crashes his car. When he comes to, he leaves the car and makes his way on foot. We get a brief interlude with the intro, and then we are in London 15 hours later, and Dr. Nolan is quickly detained by airport police and told he is being sent back to China for leaving a woman he was involved with dead in his car. Then we meet DC Hannah Lee, who is with the London police, and she is told to grab her passport, and she is handed a file on Dr. Nolan, who she will be escorting back to China later that day. She doth protest, but she has no say in the matter. Now, despite Dr. Nolan's protests of innocence, he finds out that because he hasn't actually passed through immigration, he gets no phone call and no bargaining whatsoever. He basically has zero rights. And on finding out that irritating piece of information, we meet the 10-minute mark, which is very handily marked by an advert on ITVX. Now, in terms of an intro, I feel like we get a few large pieces of the puzzle that we can start trying to work things out with, which is good. I mean, I would also say that Dr. Nolan sounds like a whiny bitch baby, but I get it. I get it. You want to leave. You want to know why you're being detained by airport police. I get it. But like, also relax. But also calm down. Just bring it down. Just bring it down just a little bit. Just a little bit. And also from the intro, I will say that I could have done with a little bit more from DC Lee, just sort of as a means to introduction, because she is one of the joint main characters, but it's fine. I'm just nitpicking. We then go on past the 10-minute mark to get to know a bit more about her. So yeah, fine. Cool. Let's stick with DC Hannah Lee as we look at her as a character. She, I would say, is basically sick of this shit. She is chosen to escort Dr. Nolan back to China because she is Chinese. She personally had zero intention of ever returning to the country where she was born and the place that may or may not have taken her mother from her. Unclear at this point. But unfortunately, she cannot say no, despite the sort of racial ickiness surrounding the situation. From the pilot episode, we also do get to see Hannah Lee interact with her family because it's her dad's birthday and she goes over to the house. And we can kind of tell that she doesn't know them too well. There's some sort of, I don't want to say hostility, but there's something between her and her family that just isn't quite sitting as smooth. She has a father, a stepmom, and possibly a stepsister, could be a full sister, unclear at this point, who she has had a falling out with, but we don't know too much of the details of this falling out thus far. We just know that her sister is some sort of journalist, and who knows? I would definitely say that there is a lot to unpick with DC Lee. And perhaps that's just because I like her vibe. Her vibe of a character is basically one of the vibes that I always like in a character. She doesn't give a shit. She's just like, oh, why am I even here? But she's also like sassy and she just gets things done. That's the vibe that I've gotten from the pilot episode, at least. Also, what I found is interesting, if we look at her circumstance in the pilot episode, we understand that she wasn't chosen because of her ability. She was chosen because of her race. And what they've at least done in the pilot episode is show us circumstances where she has the abilities and is potentially a very good police officer. We see her at the gun range and she's basically just like firing straight down the middle, just hitting body shot. We watch her, she chases down somebody in an airport and doesn't give up. And yeah, she can handle herself, which is good. So again, because that would be another ick if they've just picked her for just that one reason, even though they kind of did. Moving on to our second character, and that is Dr. Matthew Nolan, who is a vascular surgeon who was in Beijing and goes there, I think that he said twice or 4 times a year. But in this case, he was in Beijing for a conference. But he wasn't there alone. He was there with 4 other doctors. But we'll circle back around to that later. What I find is really interesting is that we only really get one scene where Dr. Nolan is completely himself. And that's in the opening. And to be honest, from those first couple of minutes, it's hard to know what to make of this man who is being chased and then speeds away in the rain and then kind of passes out and then also has a stab wound because he says that he got stabbed by a bouncer in a club. But in those first sort of 2 minutes, he doesn't seem like the kind of person that we would trust. We're just like, what are you running from? What have you done? Why are you speeding off in the rain? Why have you crashed your car and then left it there and limped off? Like, what are you trying to hide? And that's kind of the only honest viewpoint we get of him in the pilot episode. Also, we'll say that he is being taken back to China because he allegedly left a dead woman in his car. I didn't see a woman in his car. I did not see a woman in his car. Now, that doesn't really mean anything. You know how these camera angles like to be playing with our perception of reality? Like, we saw him coming out from the driver's seat. They'll do a flashback and then we'll see there's actually somebody in the back seat or someone in the passenger seat. So I'm not saying he didn't do it. I'm just saying I didn't see anybody in the car. And that he might have actually done it because emphasis on the might, because he also might be innocent, because he is adamant that he didn't do this thing that he's being accused of doing. And part of you wants to believe that person who is so vehement about their innocence, and he tries to escape and gets people to record him and is explaining that he's being held against his will and being taken back to, like, that's, he's going through a lot. He's doing a lot, you know, for somebody who could then end up being guilty. So the man may be innocent. I will also say about his characteristics, as well as being sort of determined and the way that he wants to sort of prove himself and what have you, is that he also gives arrogant. He gives arrogant and he gives entitled. Now, I'm not going to say that's because he's a white man. Not saying that at all. Those words never left my mouth. However, what I will say is that perhaps it's a doctor thing, and doctors obviously have a level of respect wherever you go in the world, and maybe he is used to being treated with such respect that the fact that he isn't is ruffling them feathers. Ultimately, when it comes to this man, my major question is, who the hell is Dr. Matthew Nolan? No, seriously, who is this man? Because he talks about wanting to get a phone call, he needs to make a phone call, but he doesn't actually mention the fact that he's got a wife and or kids. Not that he has to, but who's trying to call? I mean, we meet this man in an impossible situation, and basically the entire time that we see him, except for those first few minutes, he is being watched by the police. He can't slip up. The mask cannot drop. In the pilot episode, at least, we have no idea what this man's life is outside of this sort of 15, 20-hour window which we see him, which is very, very interesting when you deep it. Now, on to the antagonist. And it's been a while, been a few episodes since we've had a big bad, had an antagonist. And we don't really have one yet for this one. But, you know, I can riff because there is somebody out there who is trying to either frame, but definitely kill Dr. Matthew Nolan. And the question is why? The question is who? The question is somebody trying to do this directly, or have they hired an assassin? That's all I can say about this possible antagonist. Perhaps Dr. Nolan deserves to die. Perhaps he did, in fact, kill this woman that he was seeing in China, who also, spoiler alert, happens to be the general's daughter. So perhaps the general is trying to get vengeance for the death of his daughter, on which Nolan has been blamed. We don't know. All we get are very, like, Pretty Little Liar-esque, who is a type shots of this potential assassin. And actually, we don't have just one antagonist, we have two, because the second would be the government, okay, a bit out there, but the government have allowed Nolan to be extradited. And the only reason they've allowed him to be extradited is so that they don't lose the current nuclear trade deal that they're publicly aligned with China on, or something like that. So it's not even altruistic reasons. They are basically throwing him under the bus, into the wolves, and allowing him to fend for himself. But politics, am I right? And now it is time for a quick interlude to see what TV and film life is looking like beyond the pilot principle. And as always, we're starting with books. And I'm very proud of myself to finally be able to say that I finished Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan. So yay me. I have been reading this book since I think the last week of March, the penultimate week of March. And then I got busy with work and then I just didn't pick anything up because I was just so tired. And then I was like, no, I am determined. I'm sick of myself. I'm sick of myself coming here every week and telling you that I'm still reading this book. And yes, I know to some people reading one book a month or one book every 6 weeks is fine and normal in their pace. I'm a reader. I read 3 or 4 books a month. So I feel like I'm going through molasses, but it's okay because the reading slump is over and we can move forward. And the next book that I need to start is The Body in the Library by Agatha Christie, and it is the second Miss Marple book. Next, looking at film, I watched Civil War last week, and after all the hype, I want to say it was okay, but also let's not forget I'm a hater. I'm always very upfront about that fact. But I will say that it was actually really harrowing, and I was thinking about it for a few days afterwards. I did enjoy it. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 over on Letterboxd, and if anybody has Letterboxd and wants to follow me, I am just Jen02. And I'm not going to lie, Civil War is the only thing that I've watched. I probably would have popped to the cinema this weekend just gone, but there's nothing out that I want to see, and I could have watched some stuff on Netflix, but I'm not going to lie to you, I get lazy in April because May is round the corner, and May is when I do my yearly film binge. I call it a movie day in the month of May, where I basically try to watch 31 movies in May. It's that simple. If anybody wants to join, let's do it. Let's do a movie day in the month of May. I'm here for it. I'm so excited. So there's a lot of movies that I actually do want to see on streaming services that I've just been like, I'll save it for May. And finally, in television, I've also finished, she's a finisher this week, I finished Mary and George. Huzzah. I will say that the ending wasn't as good as the beginning, but I did enjoy the journey overall. And another thing I started this week, which probably was a mistake. Mistakes were made starting this program because all episodes are being released weekly, and I've caught up, and I have to wait another 5 weeks for it to be finished and all released. And that is X-Men 97. And can I just say, who asked them? Who asked them? This was supposed to be a cartoon, like a lunchtime watch, something to switch off the senses. Episode 5? Yeah, everybody keeps saying that. I kept seeing things going, episode 5, X-Men 97. I was like, what are you guys talking about? Episode 5. Yeah, and that is all I'm going to say on that. However, what I will say is that if you have made it this far into this episode, then please consider following the pilot principle on your audio streamer of choice so that I know that there are other people listening. Once you've done that, then come and find me over on Instagram, Threads, and Twitter/X at Pilot Principle, where we can chat about the latest in film and TV and books. Now, in terms of what I liked about the pilot episode of Red Eye, episode 1, there is a scene in the pilot where we follow various characters and get a sense of the layout of the plane. And this is the plane that is taking Dr. Nolan and DC Lee to China. And it's just done in a very smart way. You kind of get to see how passageways are connected, and it makes you sort of think how surprisingly easy it would be for somebody to sneak around and hide things. And already from that scene, I'm imagining the killer stalking through the plane. So I thought that was really good. I have to say, I also loved the ceremony of sort of closing the plane doors and then the timer/countdown coming up on screen, 11 hours and 31 minutes to Beijing. It's the conventions and the rules for me. It's giving, God, I hate myself. It's reminiscent of things that you would just expect from a mystery or cozy mystery type drama or series or film or book or whatever. It's the conventions and the rules for me that I'm like tick tick tick. And they always say there is a comfort and a familiarity in tropes for specific genres, and this is definitely one of them for me. The ground rules have been set and it's time to play. On the flippity flip side, in terms of what I didn't so much like, do you know what? The pacing wasn't quite there for me. Considering this is supposed to be an action thriller, there was a little bit of action, wasn't that thrilling. And I can't decide if they maybe should have started flying sooner, or if the takeoff of the plane should have been where the episode ended. I don't know. Something felt off, and there were definitely parts where I just was a bit disinterested at times. Now, I will say this possibly could have been to do with having adverts. I typically don't watch things with adverts, or at least so many adverts. I either record things or I'm watching it on Netflix or wherever else. And yes, Prime Video has started doing adverts, but they're like 15 seconds and there's like one in the middle of the program or at the very start of the program. But with ITVX, every 15 minutes there is an advert. And the advert is a good, like, more than a minute long. And I'm not gonna lie, I think it really breaks up the flow. And yes, that's how they used to do things back in the didgeridoo day. But today, I'm not used to an advert. So yes, that could have been what skewed the pacing for me. But it's impossible to say. Right, before we go on to whether or not one should be continuing with the series Red Eye, let's rewind it back and remind ourselves of the synopsis. So a British man gets caught up in an incident in Beijing, and upon his return, he's accused of foul play. Now he must go back to China to face his crimes. Yeah, I think that does a really good, well-rounded view of what the pilot episode is. However, I would have liked there to have been mention of DC Hannah Lee, personally, just for no reason whatsoever. But that's what I wanted, okay? I thought the writing was subpar. It was okay, nothing to write home about. In terms of the setting, I think the externals were generic. I didn't get the sense that we were in London for the times that we got to see sort of outside of Heathrow. And I think that was mostly to do with DC Hannah when she went to her family's home or whatever. We don't really get a sense of where she is. And I mean, that would have been nice. But yes, not specifically necessary. Maybe I'm a Londoner and I just want to keep seeing London things to be like, oh, I know where that is. And oh, I know where that is. But I will say, though, in terms of setting, that I loved the plane stuff. There was sort of a familiarity to it, yet an unchartedness to it, which, yeah, I was here for. As I said, in regards to pace, it was so, mostly meh, especially for something dubbed as action. And in regards to the end of episode Hook, a passenger has died on the plane that is 11 hours and 30 minutes away from Beijing. And they, being DC Lee and Dr. Nolan, suspect that it's because they ate Nolan's specially prepared vegan food option. We also know that there is someone on the plane who shouldn't be, and we watched them sort of sneak in as the baggage handlers were loading the luggage. So yes, in terms of the end of episode Hook, somebody is dead and our main characters are like, oh shit, things may have just gotten real. Now, in terms of a serial arc, I think, A, Nolan. Is Nolan innocent? I want to say yes, but not entirely. B, we have the government, and we do meet Director General Delaney, who works with MI5, and she is the one who basically kind of throws Nolan under the bus and gives him to China because of a nuclear deal with the country. And I'm wondering, does MI5 have something to do with the deceased daughter of the general? Is that going to be some part of conspiracy? Is Nolan just the sacrificial lamb for this? C, we have doctors. So as I mentioned, Nolan was in Beijing on a conference, but he wasn't the only doctor there. There were 4 other doctors with him, and 3 of them were strongly requested to head back to China, having just landed in Heathrow from China, but they're on their way back to, and they are on that same flight as Nolan to testify about Nolan's whereabouts leading up to the death of the general's daughter. However, one of them refused to go back to China, understandably. Like, I've just come off a 10-hour flight. You want me to turn around and do that shit all over again? Don't think so, mate. Got patience to see, want to stretch my legs. It's a no from me. However, on refusal, the man was kidnapped and we never hear from him again in the pilot episode. So I think the doctors are definitely up to something, hiding something. It's hard to say. So that is definitely another potential facet for the series. And finally is to do with DC Hannah Lee. What's Lee's family history? Why is it that they don't want to go back to China? What has their mother and their family got to do with that space? Why is she not speaking to her sister? Part of me thinks that Lee's mother will somehow become involved in all of the things. Hey, I'm just here to wildly speculate. So I think Lee's family will somehow need into the wider conspiracy. Sidebar, we meet the captain of the plane, Captain Chen, and personally, I think he's going to die. Just putting it out there, I think he will end up deceased or heavily injured. And that's just simply because before takeoff, he kissed a photo of his family. Red flag, major red flag. But of course, will we see whether any of these speculations will come into fruition? Because it is now time to ask the only question that matters on the pilot principle. Will I be continuing with Red Eye? Pause for dramatic effect? Yes, and here is why. I mean, I'm just going to put it out there. I want to solve the mystery. What else is new? I'm a mystery girly. I want to know who did it. I want to know why did it. I want to know all the things. So yes, that is why I'm going to watch it. And to be honest, that is the main reason for me, though I am also curious to learn about DC Lee, as we are given so little about her character. But we do see the foundations of the layers of her characteristics, which will hopefully unfurl throughout the series. Also, Red Eye is 6 episodes times 45 minutes. I mean, it's an easy watch, start to finish. I could bang it out in a week, especially with all episodes already being available on ITVX. But yes, it's a relatively easy watch for me, and things are quite quiet. So that is definitely another reason for me to just proceed. But of course, that is just me, and Red Eye might not be for you if you are not a sucker for looking like a clever clogs and solving a TV mystery. You may also hate shows that are relatively claustrophobic, because the majority of this will be, I believe, set within the plane setting. And so having limiting locations you might find quite droll. And finally, you may prefer a traditional British police drama. None of those other bells and whistles where they repackage it to look like something different, but we all know that it is just another police drama. And the last thing for me to do is to give episode 1 of Red Eye a pilot score, and I will be giving it a low 3 out of 5 because it did the basics. We got character setup, we got story setup, it followed traditional mystery tropes, and we are already threaded with what some of the dangers are to come. As well as that, there are a couple of dangling threads. We've got the kidnapped doctor colleague that we never see again in the pilot episode after they are taken in a white van. And we've got the MI5 and China nuclear stuff. However, with all of that being said, none of it felt original or even super interesting, which is actually just a bit of a shame. So I don't want to say 2.5, which is actually what I'm actually really thinking. So I'm going to say low 3 out of 5. Now that we have hashed out the fundamental principles, will you be giving the pilot episode a watch? Or have you already binged every episode of Red Eye via ITVX? This sounds like an ITVX sponsored podcast. I promise you it is not. Before you disappear, hit follow on your audio streamer of choice, and don't forget you can chat to me over on Threads, Instagram and Twitter/X at Pilot Principle. Whew, okay, all is said and done, so I will catch you on the next episode. Aww.